All right, in a world where alliances are constantly shifting and economic tensions are high, there's this one trade deal that's kind of flying under the radar, but could change everything. We're talking about the free trade agreement between the EU and India. And let me tell you, this is about way more than just tariffs. It's a massive geopolitical chess move, and today we're going to break down what's really at stake.
You know, the whole global economic stage right now, it's more turbulent than it has been in decades. Old friendships are getting shaky, new partnerships are popping up, and this EU-India deal, it could be the biggest one of them all. Now, before we really dive in, if you enjoy these deep dives, please hit that subscribe button. It seriously helps us make more explainers just like this one. So that really brings us to the big question, right? Is this deal just about money and trade, or is it something bigger? Is this the ultimate strategic play for both the EU and India in a world that's changing so fast? Well, that's exactly what we're here to figure out.
Okay, first things first. To really get why this deal is happening right now, we have to look at what kicked it all off. And it all starts with the pretty dramatic collapse of another huge partnership.
50%. Just let that number sink in. That's the peak tariff the Trump administration slapped on some Indian goods. They even threw in an extra 25% duty just because India buys Russian oil. I mean, this isn't your typical trade squabble. This is a full-on economic shock tactic designed to force India's hand.
And the political heat? It's just as intense. President Trump literally called the trade relationship a totally one-sided disaster. Yikes. That kind of talk has basically put high-level chats on ice. It's even reported that Prime Minister Modi hasn't been taking Trump's calls for months. So yeah, that whole bromance we heard about, it's definitely over.
But okay, let's look past the dramatic headlines for a second. The actual numbers tell a slightly different story. While Trump talks about unfairness, India's average tariff on U.S. goods is 6.2%, and the U.S. tariff on Indian goods is 2.4%. So yeah, there's a gap, but it was really the political rhetoric and those crazy new tariffs that shattered the relationship and pushed India to start looking for new partners.
And that breakdown? It created the perfect opening for a brand new strategic alliance, one with a clear goal: to counterbalance some of the other giants on the world stage.
And the foundation for this partnership is already huge. We're talking nearly $134 billion in trade between the EU and India back in 2023. That already makes the EU one of India's top trading partners. So this isn't starting from scratch, but a free trade agreement would absolutely supercharge it. And this deal is so smart because it hits key strategic goals for both of them. For the EU, it's all about de-risking, becoming less reliant on Chinese supply chains. For India, it's a double one. It gives them a buffer against their border issues with China and a much more stable market than the US right now. It's a classic two birds, one stone situation.
But, of course, it's not all that simple. There's a huge elephant in the room, and its name is Russia. Seriously, India's very old, very strong relationship with Moscow might just be the single biggest obstacle in these talks. Just think about this for a second. Cheap Russian crude oil now makes up a whopping 35% of all the oil India imports. That's a massive increase from just a few years back. And look, for a country with 1.4 billion people, affordable energy isn't just a nice-to-have, it's a matter of national security. And India is making zero apologies for it.
And yeah, this has definitely caused some friction. The EU is doing everything it can to choke off Russia's money supply. Their latest round of sanctions even goes after Indian refineries, like Nayara Energy, to stop what they call detours. Basically, they're trying to prevent Russian oil from getting a makeover in India and then being sold to Europe as diesel. But India has a pretty powerful comeback to all this: hypocrisy. Indian officials are quick to point out that while the EU is wagging its finger at them, its own members did over 67 billion euros in trade with Russia in 2024. That includes record-breaking imports of natural gas. So as you can imagine, that argument really weakens the EU's position here.
Okay, so it's not just about the big three, the US, China, and Russia. There are other important players and pressures in the region that are really shaping how these negotiations play out.
And right at the center of the EU's effort is Germany. They've had a strategic partnership with India for 25 years, so they're really pushing to get this deal over the finish line. They're looking at collaborating on defense, AI, sustainability, you name it. And German companies are chomping at the bit to get into India's tech scene. They're even offering things like free visas for students to build those connections.
Now, a deal this big is bound to create some waves. Take Pakistan, for example. They're a direct competitor with India and things like textiles, and they're watching this whole thing very, very nervously.
Right now, they get special duty-free access to the EU market. An EU-India deal could basically wipe out that advantage and put a ton of pressure on their economy.
So, with all these different forces pulling in every direction, where do things actually stand? Well, it looks like they're in the home stretch, facing the last few hurdles before what could be a massive win for everyone involved. And man, has it been a long road. These talks actually fell apart way back in 2013. They only got going again in 2022. But since then, things have moved fast. We're talking 11 rounds of negotiations already, and now both sides are aiming to get a final deal signed by the end of 2025. It seems like the political motivation is finally back. And really, it all comes down to this final balancing act. The EU wants what you'd expect: strict rules for labor and the environment, strong protection for their inventions, and, of course, lower taxes on things like cars and fancy spirits. On the other side, India is saying, hang on, we need some flexibility for our farmers, less strict rules on data, and we've got to protect our dairy industry. Finding that middle ground, that's the final boss level here.
But the prize for getting it done, it's huge. If they can seal this deal, experts think it could pump up trade between them by billions of dollars. It would create this incredible economic bloc of almost 2 billion people. That would send a really powerful message to the rest of the world about the importance of working together.
Which really brings us full circle, back to that big question. This whole deal is this fascinating clash between shared democratic values on one hand and cold, hard national interests on the other. You know, the global map is literally being redrawn as we speak. And whether this deal succeeds or fails, it's going to tell us a lot about which of those forces, values, or interests is going to shape the world of tomorrow.
So what do you think is going to happen? Will they work through these last few sticking points, or is that Russia connection just too big of a problem to solve? I'd love to know what you think, so drop a comment below. And hey, if you found this explainer useful, do us a favor and hit that like button and subscribe for more. Thanks for tuning in.